Guys, welcome to the Vlad Catcher Show, the #1 show for founders, execs, and entrepreneurs who are scaling their businesses. This video is presented by Socket.dev, and we have an amazing interview for you today with its founder and CEO, Feross Aboukhadijeh, about how he created and scaled this business. Feross, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Vlad. I appreciate it.
So tell us, Feross, what's the origin story? How did Socket.dev come about?
The Socket came from a pain that I experienced firsthand as an app developer. So I spent about a decade building applications and seeing kind of the challenges that come from building on top of a mountain of open source code. And like Vlad, most applications today, they're built on piles of open source code that your developers grab and bring in to build an application. And what I found is that there's a lot of risk that came from that. I witnessed firsthand several really high profile security incidents. And that was really the motivation that made me want to start Socket. It was realizing that there was really a gap in the market for security products that help you really, as a developer, stay secure while also letting you ship fast and build quickly. And so that's kind of where we asked ourselves, hey, can we do something about this? We built a prototype. We put it out there into the market, and then we got a really good reception. And developers were really relieved someone was finally working on this problem. And then from there, that's kind of the beginning of the Socket journey and really the first step into kind of what it became today, which is this much broader developer security platform.
And can you tell us more about how does the product work and what are some specific use cases?
So Socket is basically a platform for protecting your application and all the security aspects of your application. We built it to slot directly into where the developer spends their time, whether that's in GitHub, whether it's their IDE, wherever they're spending their time, whether it's AI tools, right? That's a big area that we see developers today. They write a lot of code using, Copilot and Cursor and these various AI tools. And the purpose of Socket is to make sure that wherever the developer is writing code, that we're ensuring that they're not making any mistakes that are going to affect the security of their application or the company that they work for. So you can really hook it in any of the major kind of areas and surfaces that developers spend their time, and it'll really catch issues proactively and help the developers stay safe as they develop quickly.
So Socket helps tech companies to protect their code, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And who's usually buying this solution? Like, who's the ideal ICP for this product?
So Socket is designed to be really easy for developers to get started with. So we do have a lot of developers that just choose to use Socket on their own to secure their applications. We made it really dead simple to get started with Socket. So a developer can come to our site and get started with just a few clicks. And so we do see a lot of this kind of organic adoption among the developer community. We have a lot of open source projects, a lot of individuals and small teams, but we also sell to the largest enterprises. We have dozens of Fortune 100s as customers as well. And what we typically see for our ICP is any company that's moving fast, that's shipping a lot of software, that has a lot of open source components. They're really, they're building a culture of empowered developers that can ship quickly. That's where we see that there's a need for something like Socket. We see there's a bigger risk to those kinds of organizations. We see that there's a lot of risk that happens when you empower developers to kind of just, pull in code and get things done and just ship quickly. And so that's where we see that there's really value that Socket can provide. We typically, come in bottoms up from the developers on the team, and then eventually make our way to the security team. And we see that it's the CISO, the head of AppSec, that ends up ultimately making the purchase of Socket, and that's kind of the budget that we come from. But we do have this kind of great organic adoption across the organization in a lot of places because we're so focused on that developer experience.
And, I imagine building a security company is difficult because not only the technology is probably difficult to build, but also customer acquisition is challenging. So you have like hard to build tech, and you have the marketing side that you have to succeed at. What would you say were some of the challenges of building a security company for us?
One big challenge with building a security company is establishing trust. So customers are literally trusting their security, with your product. And so, your security practices have to be excellent and in tip-top shape. So that means, really taking security seriously as a company to begin with. But the other big challenge in security is that this market is a very crowded space. If you go to any of the big security conferences and you walk around the expo floor, you'll just see so many companies and so many of them using the same words, the same terminology. It's really hard, even as somebody who does this for a living, to really go and understand like what do these companies do, right? What makes this one better than that one? Why do these companies all exist, right? And so I think that was the first challenge we had to solve was, why do we exist? Why do we start another security company in 2020? And we answered that question by really making sure the problem we solved was a problem that no one had solved before. And so we had a reason to exist. So for us, that was we solved this software supply chain security risk problem, which is how do I know I can trust that the code I'm pulling in from all these different sources, these open source developers that come from all around the world, these thousands and thousands of components that I'm pulling in, how do I know that I'm building a secure application when I'm using these untrusted components as the foundation? So we said, look, this is a problem. If we solve this, we're really doing a service to the industry because nobody has solved this before. It's a very hard problem to solve. There's a reason why nobody has gone out and tried to solve this. And so by starting there, we answered that question. We justified our existence. Why do we exist? So I think that's really the big first problem that a lot of security companies need to solve because it's such a crowded space. It's just there's so much noise, there's so many vendors, and they all say they do the same things. And so how do you rise above that noise? How do you kind of make a name for yourself? And I think the key is you have to focus. You have to be seriously better in one area at least. And you don't do that by boiling the ocean and trying to be an amazing product in 10 different areas. You do that by focusing on one area to begin with. And then later on comes the bigger platform where you can start to solve more and more problems for customers. But that happens only after you've really established that trust.
And many entrepreneurs think that once they find product market fit, things get easier, right? They think, hey, we made it, we found product market fit, we're getting a lot of customers. Now let's scale the business and things will be easier because we're just scaling. But in many cases, that's not true, right? Like in many cases, scaling a tech company is very difficult. What would you say are kind of some of your biggest lessons in scaling a tech company?
One big lesson is that what got you from 0 to 1 is not what's going to get you from 1 to 10. So you have to constantly evolve the way that you run your business. So in the early days, Socket was 5 people in a room. We could just have this sort of open discussion, make decisions as a team. Everybody had pretty much the state of the whole company in their mind at all times. And then what I've seen is as we're now approaching 100 employees, is that you have to have different lanes. You have to have a little bit more structure. And as someone who I pretty much abhor structure. Like I really like to keep things flat and keep things organic and keep things, down to earth. And so it's been kind of a learning for me that in order to scale, we do actually have to have some processes, some systems, and this is a sign of success, actually. It's not a sign that we're becoming, like a big slow moving company. It's actually a sign that things are working. Because if things are working, the company is going to look completely different every 6 months. It just is, and so that's part of what I've also tried to do is to tell the team that's the case, so that they know when things are changing, when things are processes are changing, we're going to change the way that the teams are structured, things like that. That they know that that's because things are working. We're actually growing as a company. We're getting big customers. We need to now have these extra these changes or these extra processes. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing for me was because of my background being an engineer and just wanting to ship and wanting to have maybe not seeing the value in some of that stuff. And just kind of wanting to just kind of keep things really, really simple. I think the other big one is the importance of hiring. So when you're small, you can have a culture where it's defined by just my preferences and like who I hire. But as we grow, the most important thing is to try to preserve that culture. Like who are we hiring? What is important to them? Why are they interested in joining the team? And to make sure that even when I'm not in the room, that the decisions that will be made are going to be decisions that I would agree with, or that I would it's like they get to as good or even better of a decision, even though I'm not in the room, right? So that comes from having this culture that's kind of in place across the whole company, and everybody's aligned and they know what they should be doing, so that if they have to decide quickly, or if they're deciding and there's I'm not in the room, or other leaders are not in the room, that they're going to make the same decision or better decision, right? And how do you do that as you grow? I think there's been some times where we felt pressure to hire for a position because we had a need, and we made a quick decision, and then that's turned out to sometimes to really not have been a good decision, to be a big mistake. And so now I'm much more comfortable taking the time, hiring slowly. It's much better to have, to not do that hire and to have everybody do a little bit more work until we find that right person than to kind of make a mistake. Because the damage that they can do to the culture and to the team and just to the everyone's morale and just dealing with that is so high, especially early on. At our size, like every hire is so critical. You can't make mistakes or take chances on a bad hire.
And what roles were difficult for you to hire, Feross?
I think hiring the sales team was difficult at first for me because I come from an engineering background, and doing enterprise sales is in my background, sales was a dirty word, actually. Nobody wants to talk to sales. It's the most annoying thing for an engineer to kind of have to interface with a salesperson to be able to use a product, right? So that's kind of where I come from. And then realizing early on in Socket that yes, we have this amazing PLG motion. It's great. It's a great way to get inbound. We have, I think, 10,000 organizations using Socket, and a lot of those are on this free plan or this team plan, which is self-service. But if we really want to become like a big security company, a big important name in the space, we're going to have to embrace enterprise sales. We're going to need to have a sales force, right? And so that's kind of something I realized early on is I'm not, I wanted to build a big company, an important company, and we're going to have to do enterprise sales. And so I'm going to have to learn how to do sales, right? And so that was something I had to learn. I leaned on mentors, investors, different folks, and learned like what is sales by doing it myself, right? I had to do all the first sales. I still to this day, like the number one thing I spend my time doing is talking to customers. But I think that the first few sales hires, like figuring out like what makes a good rep, what kind of a sales culture do we want to build? That was a real learning experience for me. Fortunately, our first sales hire ended up being actually my brother, of all people. So I poached him from Google. He used to work at Google on the enterprise sales team for GCP, and convinced him, hey, come do this crazy startup with me. We were 5 employees. He was like, I think, our 5th or 6th hire. And that helped a lot because I really had somebody I could trust, and I could really fully delegate the sales. I obviously kept an eye on things, and I still continued to do founder-led sales for a very long time into the business. But when you have somebody you can trust, a sales leader you can trust in the early days, I think it helps a lot. And that's part of that delegation I talked about, like learning to delegate, learning to trust early on as a solo founder. I think definitely recommend hiring your brother or your siblings if you get the chance to do it. It's been really great for us.
What would you look for in your enterprise sales reps and in your like sales leader, like in your VP of sales when hiring these folks for us?
Well, in the early stages, I think the first sales hire or VP of sales, whatever you want to call it, but that first person who's doing sales at the company needs to roll up their sleeves and be willing to do sales. I think a big mistake and something that I always watch out for these first hires is you need people that are willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work. And you don't want someone who wants to immediately come in and hire a whole team of people, build out a whole part of the org chart and all that kind of stuff. That is appropriate at some point in time, but not for that first hire. That first hire has to be somebody who's doing the work, because I think they have to be able to do the job before they can hire for the job. So they need to be the foremost product expert. They need to know everything about the product. They need to be able to train by hand those first sales reps. And they need to be able to answer any questions about, how do I deal with this situation or that situation? Because before you have product market fit, you don't need to be building up and scaling a big sales team. If you're hiring that first salesperson pre-product market fit, like the way we did, they need to be patient. They need to be, curious. They need to be hands on the product. They need to become a product expert. They need to like the space that they're in and want to learn all about it. And so it's a really important, I think, that you don't hire one of these folks that just are almost too senior for your stage and want to just come in and build out and scale a whole organization. Now, ideally, right, this person also has the potential to be that person. They either have done it before, or they they're ready to do that as the next step in their career. You can tell that this is something that they're ready for. Now, you're still taking a bit of a risk when you do this, when you're hiring somebody who hasn't done it yet. But I'm a fan of doing that at Socket. Like, we've done that several times, and it's worked out really well for us so far. Is basically hiring somebody who hasn't done the job yet, but you can tell that they're ready for it. This is like the next step for them, and it's going to mean a lot to them, and they're going to do really their best work of their career in this role. They're almost happy that you're giving them the opportunity to kind of take this and run with it, if that makes sense.
Is there an interview question you like to ask candidates? Like, for example, Peter Thiel asks, this question where, tell me something that you believe is true that most people would disagree with you on. Is there something you like to ask candidates when you interview them?
Yeah, I like that question too. But I think the one I like to ask is, what's the hardest you've ever worked on something? And the reason I like to ask that is because one of the things I learned pretty early on in Socket is the limiting factor in how quickly a company can ship new product and move is really the number of people in the company that care a lot about what they're doing and have a fire inside them. If you have a fire inside you, you make things happen, right? So there really is a limited number of people in any company that are these energy sources. Like, when they're in the room, like, they're contributing energy that is like the spark to make things happen. And the greater number of people are just people that they're awesome too. But they're more like that spark comes from someone else, and then they can take that and run with it. And so what you really want is people that have that spark and have that motivation. So I like that question because I think if you ask people that, the answer to look for is, okay, you want someone who's worked hard on something in their life. If they've never worked hard on anything, then they're probably not a very passionate person. So they should have worked hard on something, and you should see their eyes light up when they're talking to you about it. They should be just bubbling with energy, talking about this thing they worked on, and why it was awesome, and why they're glad they spent all the time they spent on it. And it's something that a great candidate will really shine, and they'll tell you about their obsession, they'll tell you about their hobby, they'll tell you about the work project that they work super hard on, whatever it is. But you'll see that this is a person with passion. This is a person that cares about things. And if they care about things, you can work with that. They'll do great things.
That's really interesting. You're saying hire some of these or try to hire more team members who are energy sources for us. This is cool. And what you're looking for here is you're looking for passion and hard work. So someone who worked really hard for something in their life, and the person's excited about that thing, right? Or what else do you look for when you're looking for these type of energy sources team members?
Well, they have to, when they look back on it, they need to feel like it was worth it. Some people, they'll tell you about something they worked hard on, but then when you ask them, was it all worth it? They'll tell you, I don't know, I wouldn't do that again. I worked really hard on it, but I kind of regret it. Or I wish, there was an easier way to do it. But the ones that you want are the ones that will be excited about what they learned in the journey along the way. And I think the way you see it is the eyes light up. You get a glow, you get a passion, right? You get this almost like a zeal, like a fervor. It's like this energy you can sense from people.
And what advice would you share with these tech founders for us? Aside for, ship fast, because you mentioned ship fast, iterate quickly and ship fast. What else advice would you share with tech founders?
My number one advice for tech founders is to go out and buy the book called The Mom Test. This is the best book for a technical founder to read, and it teaches you really how to validate that this brilliant, technical idea that you have is actually something that your users are going to pay for, that you're solving a real problem for them, a real pain. I love this book because it's really it's a guide on how to ask questions to customers in a way that they cannot deceive you, even unintentionally. So a lot of times customers, they'll want to just, they're talking to you, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's somebody from industry or from your last job or whatever it is. It's very hard for people to tell you to your face that what you're building is a bad idea. I would never buy that. That's a horrible idea. People don't tell, it's too awkward. A lot of time you won't get that honest feedback. And so it's very easy to be misled to, when you hear things like, Oh, that's a great idea. I would love to become a customer once you've built that. Why don't you, why don't we reconnect in 12 months once you've gotten a little bit further, and I'll absolutely become a customer. You hear people say things like this, but the reality is, 12 months later, you come to them and, they may not become a customer. They may just have been saying that to make you feel good or to avoid, the, or the other thing is they might think it's a good idea, but really when it comes down to it, people only have time for their top, 3 priorities. If you're not one of their top 3 priorities, you're not going to get budget. You're not going to get the time of day. They're not going to create a project to look at what your product does or what your product solves. If you're not top 3 priorities on their mind, it's just going to be lost in the noise, and it's always going to be pushed to the future. Oh yeah, we'll get to that next year. We'll get to that the following year. And so, how do you know that what you're building is in the top 3 priorities? You need to have the right questions. You need to have the right a way of listening to assess that. They can't just say it's a nice idea. Oh yeah, that's a cool idea. Oh, great, clever idea. It has to be this extra level of certainty that you get before you go and spend all the time investing the engineering resources to go and build the product.
And if you were starting Socket today in 2025, what would you do differently?
It's hard to answer because I feel like we did a lot of things right when we started Socket, to be honest with you. So, I mean, maybe I can walk through some of the things that I think we did well and in the early days, and maybe something that we could improve will come out of it. But one of the things we did well is we shipped quickly in the early days. We built a product that we got to market in about 7 months of building, and we did that only after I confirmed that there were a bunch of customers with this pain and with this need, as I talked about earlier. And so 7 months, it's a long time, but it's also it was a required amount of time to really get the product that we needed to build out and in a sufficient quality, to really put it in front of customers and feel good about it. But if I think we could have done anything, maybe we would have gone faster there and got something out even sooner. The other thing we did well was we did a good job of, I think, figuring out what is the value add we can provide, the smallest amount of value that we could provide that would justify somebody to install Socket. So we didn't try to solve all the problems. We picked one area that we could be the best at, and it was very narrow. It was extremely narrow, actually, but it was enough that the developer could take the step to install Socket, and that is a big amount of trust to give to a startup, is to install us into their GitHub organization where we have access to their code and to all their workflows and to put us in that position of privilege and trust. And so we picked a pretty good slice of functionality, which was, at the time, there was this big type of attack happening all over the ecosystem called typo squatting, which is when somebody registers a name that's one letter off from the correct name, and then if a developer makes a typo, installs the wrong package with one letter different, they'll actually be bringing in some malware, some viruses to their system and affecting their whole company potentially. So this was a big problem, and we built a very targeted solution to solve just that problem. And it's not at all enough on its own to be a true security platform or really solve a big problem for a company, but it was enough to kind of break through the noise and say, look, this startup company, we solved an actual problem for you. It's a real problem. There's an immediate solution. You can go take this step and install Socket. And then around that initial core, we built the rest of the product. So I think we did a really good job of doing that. And I think this actually brings me to the thing I would do differently, which is, we followed the good startup advice around not over engineering. We built this targeted piece of functionality. We got it out there, and it proved to be incredibly popular. I mean, we had, I think, 1,000 installs in the first month. These are not 1,000 normal installs. These are 1,000 organizations that brought us into their organization and installed us in this critical workflow. So it's an incredible amount of trust, and to receive that after just 30 days of having a product is pretty incredible. But we built it super quick, because we didn't know whether this was going to be a driver of like the main way customers would consume our product or not. And so we built it kind of as an MVP, quickly. In fact, I think we did it in a couple weeks before launch day, just to kind of have something that we could include in the launch. And it turned out it was the core way people used our product till this day. And so some of the decisions we made in the engineering and in the way we architected it turned out to be not really the right design for the future of the company. And this is what you see, was this trade-off of, if you build quickly, you can get that market validation, which is awesome, but then you sometimes dig yourself out of the technical debt. You end up having to do all this work later on to clean up the mess. But I think probably it was still the right decision, because you never know. You never know what's going to work and what's not. And if we had invested so much time to build it the correct way, maybe another competitor would have got to market before us. Maybe we would have been too slow. Maybe we would have ended up over-engineering it and kind of muddling the message of what is this for, what is the problem it's solving if we tried to do too many things. So I would say, yeah, maybe I'd do it differently. Maybe it was actually the right decision after all. I don't know. We'll never know.
And what's the best business advice you've ever received, Feross?
The best business advice I've ever received. I think that the most important thing to focus on is to make sure you're building something that people actually want. So this goes back to what I talked about before around validating that what you're building is solving a top 3 pain point for a customer. If it's not in the top 3, then they are not going to care, and it is not going to be something that they prioritize. So you have to absolutely make something that people want. Once you've done that, I think the other best advice I've received is to think about distribution like as important as the product. So distribution is as important as the product. If you don't have a distribution plan, then this distribution, it's like it is a key like IP that that is important to the company. It is key, is as important as having a good product. Is how are you going to get people to be aware of this product and know about this product and want to use this product. And again, as an engineer, coming into becoming a founder, I think sometimes you actually get the opposite advice, which is the wrong advice, which is that the product will sell itself, and that is not true. I think there's so many examples of inferior products winning and beating better products. You see it everywhere, right? There are so many companies that are very good at, they can't come up with good product ideas, but they can look around and they can see other startups that have good ideas and copy those ideas and build a worse version of them. It's 50% as good, but you know what? It's good enough, and they market it better. They hire a better sales team. They have a better distribution plan. Maybe they're an incumbent and they already have 5, 6 other products, and they can bundle this in with one of those products and sell it as almost undercut the competition. These distribution things really matter in terms of winning and succeeding. So you have to take that really seriously, especially as a startup when you are usually at a disadvantage for distribution. So you have to really think about, okay, how are we going to get our word out? Are we going to have some kind of social media strategy? Are we going to have, a free PLG motion? Are we going to have, in the case of Socket, we have this advantage, which is we put all of the data for all of the security findings that we produce on our website for free. And so any developer, any security team can look up anything in our data set totally for free. And this is our secret sauce. This is what we spend so much AI credits and tokens with OpenAI and Anthropic to produce these insights, and then we just give them away. But what we find is that creates a distribution like advantage for us, where people learn about Socket, they come in through that channel, they get the trust in Socket, and then when it comes time to do the enterprise sale, we have a lot easier time. We win more, we win more deals. We come out more trusted. We're in the evaluation process where the competitor isn't, because they're not top of mind, right? So you have to take this stuff seriously. And I think the other important thing to mention, just in case there's any technical founders in the audience that don't like how it sounds, what I'm saying. They don't like that. They don't like the idea of. They don't want to admit that this distribution is very important. They want to kind of have this naive idea that the product and the product will sell itself. This idea, like, what I want to tell them is, you don't have to think of distribution as it's not an either or. It's not like you're going to do distribution and you're going to build a bad product. You can do both, right? You should have the best product, but you should also think about how you're going to distribute it. Because if you have the best product but you don't have the distribution strategy, you're going to struggle. You're going to probably end up being a small, like acquisition, or you're going to have your company is going to fail ultimately. You have to have both. So you can do both. Distribution is just another engineering problem to solve. You just look at it as it's a puzzle. What am I going to tweak in my, my SEO or my, marketing or whatever it is, so that I can kind of get these, people coming in the front door and trying to learn more about my product. And it's just another puzzle. It's another, technical challenge you can tackle. It's actually fun. It's not something to be afraid of as a technical founder.
Well, Feross, I'm so happy and grateful that you came on the show and shared the Socket journey. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our viewers before we log off?
No, Vlad, it's been great. It's been great being on the show. Really appreciate you, having me on. It's been a really fun conversation. I think the thing I'll leave the viewers with is that, The security space it's a very exciting space to be in at this time. One of the things I love about security is that it's a very dynamic field. If you look at some other areas like architecture, right? You have the laws of gravity never change. So you learn how to build a bridge today, that bridge is going to be the same, and it'll stand up in 100 years. But in security, everything that you do is constantly evolving because you have this attacker and defender, and it's a dynamic system. The defender learns how to defend, and then the attacker evolves, and they create a new attack, and the defender has to adapt. And so you have this cat and mouse game. It's one of the best things about the field is it's always dynamic, it's always evolving. So it's a super fun field to be in. And so I just recommend folks, apply to work at Socket if you're interested in security at all, or even if you're not, if you're into dev tooling or AI, we're hiring, we're growing really quickly.
All right, Feross. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Vlad. Appreciate it.